Our last step in the value scale practices is learning about gradual value changes. So far, we have worked with sudden value changes. As I mentioned previously, sudden value changes are where we see a very distinctive separation between the values. There's a line there that clearly separates one from the other. In a gradual value change, we are going to slowly change from one value to the next, and it's going to have a more blended, smooth gradation. So if you're familiar with any terms in computer work, then this is what is known as the gradient when you're working within a computer program. To do this, we're going to do a little bit of erasing. Now, we don't want to erase too harshly on our paper, because as I mentioned before, you press too hard with the eraser, you're going to change the texture of the paper, and that will in turn affect what your values look like. So I'm going to lighten up the lines here that separate my paper into individual value areas. Now, since there is already a lot of pencil on my paper, I want to prevent as much smudging as possible. So I suggest you take a piece of the ribbon paper, and I'm going to remove the side pieces with the holes. And I'm going to use this as a protector against my paper. So what that does is, by laying this down, then when I rest my hand on my paper and I move across my paper, I'm not going to smudge my graphite everywhere. I'm not going to get that black graphite on the outside of my hand. And this will allow me to come in here and just lighten up these lines. Again, I don't want to press really hard with the eraser. The lighter my lines, the easier they will to make them disappear. But it's just enough to lighten them. They will show up, especially in our lighter values, when it comes to doing the gradated value scale, but they won't be quite as noticeable. So I'm going to do that to each of these sections underneath my smooth, gradual value changes. I took my paper over to the garbage can and dumped the eraser pieces off of it, so that this is now prepared for me to start some value scales. So in gradual value or blended value, the goal is to have it slowly change one value to the other. Now you can quickly practice this or get the idea of it if you take a pencil and somewhere off to the side here, start applying heavy pressure, just scribble back and forth, and as you move further down the page, you just ease up on pressure. Okay, this is a gradual value change. It's not a neat process, it's just a tester to show how pressure is going to have to start to either increase if you start light, and you're going to have to press harder and harder and harder to get darker values as you shade, or if you start in your darker range, you're going to have to ease up on pressure to get into the lighter range. And the goal is, as I said, that we don't have a very separate line of distinction between those values. So this does take a little bit of practice and a little bit of patience. This is a technique, though, you're going to need. A lot of the items we will choose to draw will have areas in which the values are going to slowly change one from the other. So I'm going to once again start with my HB. Now, as I said, I already have a lot of graphite on here, so I'm going to use this piece of paper to protect what values I have already applied. I'm going to take my HB pencil, and for me, when I do Gradual, I actually go the reverse of everything I've done so far. I start with my darkest value because I find it's easier to control working with dark values and easing up on the pressure of my pencil as I come across the value scale than if I start light and increase the pressure. When we do gradual value scales, we still continue to work with our smooth or circular shading technique. And if I'm going to start in the dark area, I'm going to start with my heavier pressure. And again, working with that circular smooth shading, I'm going to start establishing a dark value. Now I want this gradual value to stretch all the way across this space. Since I want it to stretch across that space, that means I'm going to have to bring this dark value out quite a distance. I'm not going to just stop here and start lightening up on my pressure to lighten up the value. I want to bring it across. I'm not going to fill the same amount of space with this darkness because I need to start transitioning into a lighter pressure so that when I'm somewhere about here, I'm starting to work with this value and then transition as I move this way. So I start somewhere within this area with this value. So I'm going to use this as a guide for my value changes, but I'm not going to match it exactly because, like I said, we want a gradual change. So I don't want there to be a line separating this value from this value. I want this to fade into this value. So I'm starting to ease up on my pressure. I'm starting to get lighter. And the nice thing about working with this type of value change is as I move along, I can stop and kind of look at what I've done. And if I notice that there does seem to be a very distinctive line in that value, it doesn't seem to just fade from one to the other, then I can go back and make corrections. So let me get some more value applied here, and I'll see if there's an area I end up with in which I need to go back and make corrections, and I'll show you how to do that. Okay, I'm stopping to look at my value. And I see here, there's a little bit of unevenness. It seems a little bit darker up here, and then I have kind of like a light area here. So this is an area I'm going to come back and go over top again. And the thing is, when you do make corrections, that means it could affect anything after that area. So as I start adjusting this, then I got to start paying attention to see where else I may need to adjust, moving this along this way so I get that gradation. I'm also looking to see if there's any place in which my shading technique got a little loose and needs filled in more with more overlapping. Again, we're trying to go with a smooth shading technique, So that means I want this to have a smooth appearance, very little texture showing, and just mainly value changes from grays, blending one into the other. So I'm starting to like the look of that a little bit. Here I see a little bit of a dark mark. So I'm going to try to blend that out some. And now that I've matched that in behind here where that mark seemed to be, I'm definitely getting a little bit more of a separation here from this value to this. So I need to come in and start adjusting this. So I'm seeing a little bit of a darker area here. I got a little bit too much pressure there. So I'm going to stretch this gray over a little further. And blend this out further to the right. Okay, so that doesn't look too bad. I'm not noticing right now any huge lines of separation, but that could change. Do not be shocked that when you put this away one day and start working it on the next, that you may notice it suddenly. Sometimes we just need to take a break from looking at it to really see where things need corrected. So for now, I'm going to leave that HB gradual value change, and I'm going to move down here and try it with my 6H. So again, same process as what I just did with my HB, but different pencil. So I know that my dark values aren't going to be as dark as these ones. I know I'm going to be able to get a little bit of a lighter value as I come across. And as a lot of you had pointed out, you notice that you do notice your strokes a lot more with the H pencils than with the HB, just because they are a harder graphite. So do be aware of that. While you're working with this, you really have to watch and control this circular movement. So again, we're not ending up with a large, messy scribble, and we're trying to keep it as smooth as possible with as little texture from our pencil movement as possible. So again, I'm keeping this paper under my hand, and I'm going to work a gradual value change in 6H in this area below my 6H sudden value change. So this one I do have a little bit more of adjustment to make. I'm getting this dark spot here, and all I can think is that when I erase it, maybe I pressed too hard there with the eraser. It just, my pencil even feels different in that area, so something happened here to my paper and it's somehow changed the texture, and the graphite really seems to want to embed itself there. So this is why I caution about things like erasing, especially pressing the eraser too hard. Just watching how we take care of our drawing surface. Now again, this is practice, so this isn't going to hurt anything other than it's just annoying to me when I look at. But it's something you want to consider, you know, thinking about when we go into our next project or our good project, in that we do have to watch how we handle our projects, and we'll talk more about that later. But for the most part, I'm getting a pretty good gradient. Here, it's kind of hard. If I try to ignore the pencil line that is showing through that I erased, it seems to be a pretty smooth transition. But again, because I had these lines darker and tried to lighten them, they're not going to disappear or blend in, especially in light value areas. Up here with HB, being that it's a slightly darker pencil because it's a softer graphite, they blend it out. So I'm just going to continue with my pencils. As I said, maybe when I finish this one, I may look back at this one and notice something I can fix using my pencil and pressure and reapplying values or stretching values across. That might be the answer to this area. I might have to just bring this value even further over and then fade into these other values after that, and maybe that will hide it more. So when working with a gradual gradient value change, it is a lot of adjustment, and it is a technique that probably will take longer than any of your other value scales. But like I said, it's one you're going to use a lot in a pencil drawing. A lot of objects have that gradual value change. So this is another skill we practice so we are prepared for our project. So I'm going to continue to work with this gradual value change. I will continue with my 2H, my 2B, and my 6B, and then we'll evaluate them at the end. So I finished my gradual value scales. I have, and I'm going to list them since the listing was way over here for step. I have a 5-step HB, and this is with that smooth circular shading technique. And then I have a gradual value of it below. In this one, I have a 5-step, and this is my 6H. And again, this is a sudden value change using the circular shading technique, and below it a gradient. I have a 5-step 2H, and again, sudden value scale change up above using the circular shading technique, and gradient down below. I have a 5-step 2B, again, sudden value scale up above using the circular shading technique, and gradient down below. And then to finish it up, I have my 5-step 6B, and once again, circular shading technique up above and gradient down below. So for the most part, I'm pretty happy with my gradients. Looking at them, there you have a couple little spots where the pencil just really gripped to the surface of the paper, like here and here in my 6B. I'm not sure why. It really stuck there. My pressure was even, but it did. A couple of other spots throughout up here also, that was near the eraser mark, so I'm not sure if that has something to do with that mark there. It is difficult. It takes practice to get a nice even gradient. This entire worksheet that we did is in preparation for our project. We are going to be applying these techniques. Everything we learned about pressure, everything we learned about circular or smooth shading, and everything we learned about with our gradients and sudden value changes and overlapping is going to come into play with our project. So what I'm looking for, especially in these circular shading techniques, is an improvement in your skill. Your first one with HB may not look as nice as your 6H, and it may not look as nice as your 2H, because this is new to you. This is where you want to make your mistakes, but it's also where you want to correct them. If you're not trying to apply what was instructed, the small circular movement, the constant overlapping, then you are going to find when it comes to the project that you're going to have a more difficult time creating a clear image. Any corrections I'm going to make on this, I'm going to do off camera, but at the end you should have your 4 directional shading techniques, 5-step value scales, all sudden values for HB, 6H, 2H, 2B, and 6B. And you should have also on your paper your circular shading section. It should be with the boxes and rows divided in half. We carefully erased the division lines in one half of the row, and you should have your HB sudden value scale changes with smooth circular shading above, and then your gradient circular smooth shading technique below. And that should be for each pencil, including 6H, 2H, 2B, and 6B. So that ends our value scale exercises. Now we're going to get into the drawing of our project, and then we will get to the part where we combine the drawing with everything we just learned about applying value with pencil to paper.